Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz, and as ever, I am the IT Geek. Welcome back to where we've started on Module 4, and we've been obviously working with Dwayne with his demos, and I've been doing a lot of the theory. Unfortunately, again, me and Dwayne having to record separately just because scheduling conflicts and stuff like that. The last episodes we looked at entitled management. So that they came out last week on Friday. So this should be released on Monday the 5th, I believe. So today we're going to be looking at planning, implementing and managing access reviews. So yeah, I'll similar to I've done it previously. I'll do some of the theory and then I'll hand over to Dwayne, who's going to have done some pre-recorded demos. So let's get started with this episode. So hopefully you still remember who I am, and you still remember who Dwayne is. We did some introductions at the beginning of each module, so don't need to go through that again. We are deep into Module 4, as I mentioned, and Module 4 is looking at planning and implementing an identity governance in Azure AD. So in this particular episode, this is part 1 of the planning, implementing and managing access reviews. We're going to cover planning for an access review. We're going to look at creating access reviews for groups. And as before, where it's probably easier to show than tell. Dwayne's going to do an actual demo. We're not going to cover any theory of the access reviews for groups. Dwayne's just going to go ahead and do straight a demo. So let's get started. Let's look at planning for access reviews here. So what first we need to answer, people might be asking, what is an access review? So an access review, as the name implies, I suppose, is a planned review of the access needs, rights and history for user access, or user access. Access reviews, that they help users ensure that the right people have the sort of right access to the right resources, essentially. They mitigate access risk by protecting, monitoring, and auditing access to critical resources and assets. At the same time, you're ensuring employee and business partner productivity as well. It's all right mitigating risk. We need to make sure our users are staying productive. Finally, the access reviews, is performed as part of the Azure AD Identity Governance, which is all part of that Azure AD P2 license that we've kind of mentioned. Sort of all the topics we're talking about in Module 4 are covered within that. You need to consider your organizational needs to determine that strategy for deploying access reviews in your environment, so that's quite key. So for access reviews, you're likely to include representatives from different teams. So you need to make sure you engage your stakeholders. So some of the teams I wanted to touch on, the key stakeholders. First, IT admins. They manage the IT infrastructure and administrate, they administer your cloud environment and those resources and investments, including that sort of SaaS element and those apps. So very key stakeholder really are the IT admins. And again, your dev teams, they build and maintain those applications for your organization. So again, it's important to engage them when, we're doing these sort of access reviews. There's various there's business units that manage projects in their own applications as well. So there could be different business units within your organization, finance, marketing, HR. It's important to include them in any sort of discussions. And finally, your corporate governance ensures that the organization is following that internal policy and complying with regulations. So it's important to get that internal sort of corp governance team involved as well. So when we talk about planning a pilot, Microsoft they encourage customers to initially pilot access reviews with a small group and target non-critical resources. When you're talking any sort of product, any sort of service, it's always recommended to do a pilot rather than go straight into testing and production. Let's try play with that. Let's see, is it going to actually fulfill our needs? Piloting can help you adjust processes and communications as needed, increase user and reviewers' ability to meet security and compliance requirements. Some recommendations around a pilot are, start with reviews where the results are not automatically applied, and you can control the implications then. You ensure that all users have valid email addresses listed in Azure AD, and that they need, that when they do receive email communication, they can take appropriate action. Always important documenting, document any access removed as part of the pilot in case you need to quickly restore it afterwards. And then finally, again, monitor audit logs to ensure all events are properly audited. So just some sort of key recommendations around planning a pilot, which is obviously recommended by Microsoft. So let's discuss what actual resources are actually, are reviewed. So sort of typical targets for reviews, include user access to applications integrated with Azure AD for SSO, such as Microsoft 365, Exchange Online, those SaaS line of business apps. Group membership, so this is synchronized to Azure AD or created in Azure AD or Microsoft 365, including Microsoft Teams. Access packages that group resources, so as groups, apps, and sites into a single package to manage access. And finally, Azure AD roles and Azure resource roles are defined in Privileged Identity Management, PIM, which we are going to be talking about in the next sort of topic, which is obviously this is a two-parter. After this, we've got 2 episodes on PIM, so we'll go into more detail then. So who can create and manage access reviews? So we talk about groups and applications. We can split that down into sort of 2 elements. We've got creators. So these are like global admins, user admins. We've got identity admins as well that are classed as creators. Identity governance admins, they can also sort of create a group and application level. We're talking about managing access reviews. Also privileged role admins as well. And finally, we can't forget group owners. So these are all the users that, this type of groups or roles that can manage and create access reviews at a group and application level. But then on the other side, we've got read access as well. So again, global admins, because they obviously have creator access. Global reader as well, that they can read access to access reviews and manage them. A user admin is also able to do that, as well as your identity governance admin, privileged role admin. So the same roles really, in addition to security reader and your group owner as well. So again, similar roles with a few additions for read access. When looking at the Azure AD role level of managing and creating access reviews, again, split it down the middle, we've got those creators and readers. We'll look at creators first. Again, global admins, your privileged role admins, but then that's it. Whereas with read access, we do obviously have global admin. We have that global reader again. This time, user admins can have read access at the Azure AD role level when managing access reviews. Privileged role admin again. Security reader as well. So again, slight difference when we come to the Azure AD role side of it. And then if we look at the Azure resource role level, so managing access reviews from this perspective, again, got the creators on the left, where we've got global admin, and again, just privileged role admin. But then that read access is going to be a bit more because we've got global admins again, obviously we've got global reader again, from a read perspective. User admins as well can read Azure roles from a managing access review perspective. Privileged role admin, so again, very similar to the Azure roles, and then security admin as well. Security reader, my apologies. Looking from an Azure package perspective, when we're talking about managing access reviews, creators are global admins, they can create. User admins can create access reviews. Identity governance admins can also create access reviews for Azure packages, but that's it. But when we're talking about having read access to access reviews for Azure package, global admin, obviously, it's a common theme there. Global reader as well. The user admin still. And again, still the identity governance, so the same ones essentially. Then we additionally have that security admin as well. Okay. Now, we're talking about access reviewers. Okay, the creator of the access review decides at the time of creation who will perform the review. So this setting can't be changed once the review is started as well. Okay, so we've looked at who can create them, but now from a reviewer perspective, it's the creator who chooses it, so the creators that we saw earlier in those slides. Reviewers are represented in three different sort of personas. So we've first got that resource owner, who they're essentially the business owner of that resource. Then have a set of individually selected delegates, and they're selected by the Access Reviews Administrator. Finally, we have the end users who will each self-attest to their need for continued access. So when they try to get that, renew that access. So a few key points about planning. We're almost to the end now. We're going to be passing over to Dwayne shortly. Access packages can vastly simplify your governance and your access review strategy. You know, an access package, it's a bundle of resources with the access a user needs to work on a project or perform their task. Besides access packages, you know, reviewing group membership is probably the most effective way of governing the access. And Microsoft recommend that access to resources is assigned via security groups or M365 groups, and that users are added to those groups to gain access. Microsoft also recommend that group owners review membership as they're probably in the best place to know who needs access. Ownership of groups differs with each sort of type of group. And there are times when conditional access policies designed to keep your network secure shouldn't apply to all users. So a good example of this is a conditional access policy that allows users to sign in while on the corporate network. It might not apply to like your sales team who might be traveling and might be out and about. In that case, the sales team membership would be put into a group, and that group would be excluded from that conditional access policy. Again, sticking, still on that key points around planning, to minimize that manual work and associated potential errors, consider using dynamic groups, and with these you can assign group memberships based on users' attributes. You may want to create one or more dynamic groups for external users. The internal sponsor can act as that reviewer for membership in that group as well. Access reviews can't change the group membership of groups that you synchronize from on-premises with Azure AD Connect. So this is because that source of authority is actually on-premises Active Directory. You can still use access reviews to schedule and maintain regular reviews of on-premises groups. And reviews will then take action in the on-premises group. This strategy keeps access reviews as a tool for all reviews as well. When you review access to an application, you're reviewing the access for employees and external identities to the information and data within the application. Choose to review an application when you need to know who has access to a specific app instead of an app access package or a group. Finally, PIM or Privileged Identity Management simplifies how enterprises manage privileged access to resources in Azure AD. This keeps the list of privileged roles, both in Azure AD and Azure resources, much smaller, and it increases the overall security of that directory. And again, we are going to be talking about PIM in much more detail over 2 episodes after we're done with this managing access reviews topic. So rather than talking about creating and configure access reviews for groups and apps, it is good old demo time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Dwayne, who's going to go through the demo. Over to you, Dwayne.
Thanks, Shabaz, and let's get into our demo on access reviews. So we're going to go into our Azure Active Directory here. And if we go down to identity governance, this is the best way to get into our access reviews. And if you remember from our previous demos when we were talking about entitlement management, permission management, and all that, we have our access reviews right here in this section. And so these access reviews and something we'll talk about when we get into privileged identity management a little bit. You can do access reviews for that as well as access reviews for for your access for your access packages and for your guests and all of those things. So we're going to go into our access reviews here. And from our access reviews, we are going to create a new access review. And so within here, we select what type of review. Are we doing it for specific applications? Are we doing it for teams and groups? We're going to do it for teams and groups. We're going to select a team or group, or we could do this also for all groups with guest users and do it for our guest users only. And so multiple groups, and we'll talk in the next demo about setting up kind of a methodology around this and setting up specific review programs. But for this particular one, we're just going to set up a straight up group, and I'm going to just stick with the select teams and group, and I'm going to set my admin accounts here. So I've got it set to my admin accounts, and here we can do all users within that group or just guest users within that group. Important thing to think about, and we've talked about this multiple times. We talked about it during entitlements, is that we want to make sure that we are governing over especially those users that are not part of our tenant and that are guests to our tenant. Make sure that they don't have levels of access they shouldn't over a long period of time. Their ability to work within our environment and to have access to our resources should be finite in nature and have a particular start and end time, and the access reviews help to govern over that and set those means and make sure that if that does need to be extended, that it is. So we're going to stick here with the guest users. In here, I don't have any guest users that I recall in this admin group anyway, but here we can do a multi-stage review and set up multiple reviewers and set up what those reviews are in step. I'm just going to do a specific reviewer. We can then make it group owners. We can make select users. So if I select a reviewer, say I go select myself here, set up my my global admin here, and then we can set up these reviews. Note in here that there is a users review their own access within here. This is not recommended when it's guest users. If it is users on your tenant, then especially this group being admin accounts, maybe we are going to allow them to be self-reviewers, but we should never let a guest user be a self-reviewer. Keep that in mind. But it is always really good to have a user. We could do, if we did the multi-stage review, we could have the user do their own access and then have, as a second stage, somebody else review as well, so they can review and have a 3-day review that they respond that, hey, they still need access, and then still have somebody verify it as well. That's a good use case for that multi-stage review. If we want to have the user do a self-review, but then also have a supervisor or an admin do that secondary review, that's good. But like I said, guest users should never be their own reviewer. We set the duration. This is how long that review is going to take place. So we'll make this a one-time. We'll talk about the programs here in a moment in the next demo. And we'll say the start date is today. 8/31 is the day I'm recording this. So that's what we'll do. So this review is going to take place for 6 days. So the review, once this review goes out and I get notified, I have 6 days to review this. Next, we now set up what happens. And we can set this up to auto reply. And if the reviewers don't respond, we can make no change. We can remove access. We can approve that access, or we can take recommendations. Best practice that I think that if somebody is not taking the time to respond to needing access, especially if it's a self-review, then they probably don't need access anymore. So a good practice here is just to remove that, remove their membership, or block them from signing in for 30 days, and then remove them from the tenant. If it's since this is a guest user, or if this was a guest user account, or you just remove them from the resources. At the end of the review, we can then also send that notification as well. to those accounts if we wanted to, just to let them know, hey, you're about to lose, hey, you're about to lose access. We can enable, enable no sign in for 30 days. We also have some, advanced settings for justification and email notifications. So, if they do need access and they respond, we need them to justify why they respond. So what we're doing here is we're creating an audit trail, and we're letting that letting that user, and letting this reviewer make these decisions, but we want that justified. We want to know why. We've got a reminder here to say, midpoint through the review, so after 3 days, hey, reminder, please review, otherwise this user is going to be shut off from having access. And then we set review and create. We set the review name, and then we create that review. So we'll say admin account access review, and we create that review. Like I said, this is a one-time only, so we're just kind of showing how we can create that review, how that works for our users and guests. We select create, and that initiates that 6-day review. It's going to then send emails to me for each one of those accounts that I have a review. I have to review everybody in that group for their access and their continued access to our to the accounts and to the resources that they're assigned. So that's how an access review works. Again, we'll talk about programs and how we can get a little bit more granular on this and build different programs for different types of accounts in the next demo. So other than that ends this demo on how to create an access review, and I'll send it back to you, Shabaz.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Another great demo, and that was around sort of creating and configuring access reviews for groups and apps. So again, very relevant to what we've just spoken about. And this is at the end of part 1 of managing access reviews, the access review topics. We've got part 2, where we're going to be covering a few more areas within quite important. And obviously, Dwayne's going to do another demo. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for your ongoing support. It's been one hell of a series. The support from the community has been amazing. I've had people messaging me saying that the videos have helped them pass the exam. I can't think of a bigger compliment than that. So I want to thank those people for watching and letting me and Dwayne help you. Something important, obviously, just links in the description. We've got link to Dwayne's book, so make sure you do buy that. I've heard from people who have bought the book and followed the videos, and they said it's a great combination. So that's really good to know. Thank you for your feedback. A link to our socials, Twitter, LinkedIn. Follow us, ask us any questions, and also a link to the GitHub library where you can find the labs. You can follow us, Dwayne's doing them as well. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, thank you and goodbye.